Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, I'm going to be talking about secondary red dots. This essentially, as the name implies, is a secondary optic added to a rifle or a carbine that complements a magnified optic, allowing you to make closer range shots quicker with ease. This might be useful to some, it might not be useful for you, but let's talk about it and see what's what. First of all, let's talk about the concept here. A lot of guns use a magnifier that flips up and goes over your red dot or your holographic sight, which is a 1x, and allows it to be magnified. Well, this is simply a different approach to a similar problem. If you want magnification and you use a scope or an LPVO, then you might want to actually consider adding a 1x red dot to give you a very easy to flip to 1x magnification for closer shots. You can also use smaller optics that are made for handguns, such as a Leupold Delta Point Pro, Trijicon RMR, Holosun 507 and 508 series. Those are all really small, inobtrusive optics that, when added to a rifle that has a scope that is magnified, can create a lot better functionality for switching between two different kinds of magnification. This kind of setup has become very popular with tactical and defensive shooters, as well as competitive shooters alike, for a very good reason. It allows you to make very good close-range shots very quickly, without sacrificing the magnification that you also want for your longer-range shots. Even if you have an LPVO, grabbing that throw lever and switching to 1x magnification comes with its disadvantages because, well, it's simply slower to switch between magnification on an LPVO, and the eye box simply is just not as forgiving, whereas quickly flipping to your 1x is a really, really good option, especially if you need to get to that first close-up shot in a jiffy. Also, these work as excellent backup sights. A lot of people, myself included, like to opt for flip-up iron sights. Those are great, they're very reliable, but they aren't as fast or easy to use, and this actually is, albeit it is also battery-powered. Those are things to weigh out, but this is a viable option if you do need a backup sight. Now, on a rifle, there are two ways to generally configure a secondary red dot. The first one is the way that I don't have it configured, but if we do imagine an invisible red dot sitting up top here for demonstration purposes, let me talk about the advantages first. First thing is that it is very intuitive to actually bring into your sight picture because it is perfectly in line. You can be at low ready, and all you need to do is just raise your carbine or rifle up, and it comes into your sight picture very easily. Also, the stock placement is very consistent. You're not doing any weird angles here. Again, one less thing to worry about. You're just used to doing this. You don't need to train around that, which is really nice. Also, it's ambidextrous, so I can switch my shoulders here. No problem. I can see just fine either way, right over the top of my scope, and that works great. Also, when you zero it, it doesn't require you to use any weird angles. You simply rest the bottom of your rifle onto whatever your rest is and zero it just like any other optic. Also, a really good advantage if you are using night vision or gas masks is that it's nice and high, which generally is favored by folks using that kind of equipment because your gas mask and night vision doesn't get bunched up here with the stock and all the other weird doodads that you have down here. It's a nice clear area for your picture and just doesn't get in the way very easily. Also, if you're doing night shooting, boop, boop, and you have your weapon light on, after firing your first few shots, you're gonna have a smoke cloud that's backlit by your weapon light. That makes your sight picture a little difficult. Having that little bit of extra height on top of your scope actually allows you to have a little bit of a clearer picture because it is clearing that cloud just a little bit more. That might give you an edge, and that is something really important to consider. Now, there's also some disadvantages that you really need to consider about the top mount or piggyback red dot on top of your scope. First one is the cheek weld or lack thereof. Because I am in line with the scope here, that looks great, but as soon as I come up to actually sight in into my backup red dot here, I'm actually going for a chin weld as opposed to a cheek weld. I don't find that very comfortable. I also find that that contributes to added recoil because you are just that much less into the gun and your body is just not going to actually absorb that recoil as much. Your follow-up shots are going to be a little bit more awkward. I'm not crazy about it. Some people can train around it. I think everybody can technically, but it is definitely a factor. Also, your height over bore is fairly significant. By going up that high, your offset is going to be pretty notable. So that is something to consider, especially at closer ranges when you're trying to make really accurate shots into A zones on targets. You can easily mess it up if you don't know your holds. So as always, know your holds, but this becomes a little bit more challenging with that. Also, the scope elevation turret on here might get in the way. In this case, probably not, but certain ones are pretty tall, so you might need to get a riser for it, even further increasing the height of your secondary red dot. Furthermore, there's limited options for mounting them. On the setup here, I actually have 0 options. You can get scope mount rings with Picatinny on them. Certain scopes also have Picatinny that facilitate this, but it's not that common unless you're using something like an ACOG or certain other kinds of scopes. That is something to consider. You might need to actually play around with some other aftermarket options to make this happen. Moving on, let's talk about the pros and cons of the offset or canted red dot. That is the setup that I am clearly running right here. First of all, it is low profile. That means that it's tucked in nice and tight and basically in the arc of the optic that I primarily am using, allowing me to very quickly switch between the two very smoothly and also allowing me to maintain my cheek weld. It's very consistent, very intuitive, and very, very fast. Also, if you have a weapon light that is in line with this red dot, such as the one that I have here at the 130 position, you actually don't get really any visible weapon light shadow because it is all right on top of it. That is a nice little perk. It is unique to certain setups, but it may apply to you, and it is something to consider. There's also definitely some disadvantages to this setup. First of all, your stock is at an angle. When you are using your secondary red dot, you are canting the entire rifle. Therefore, you have a stock that is sitting diagonally into your shoulder pocket. Adding armor into this makes it even more complicated. It is something that you definitely need to train around. I personally find it fairly easy and natural, but some people might struggle with this. Also, it's not very ambidextrous. Shooting right-handed, no problem, but if I switch shoulders here, I find that it is a little awkward having to use my left eye there and acquire it. It's just not something I'm used to. Again, something to train around, but the stock placement here is definitely less ideal. That's actually the big problem with this whole thing. I don't think that it's impossible to do it, of course, but it is something to note. It's simply just not as ambidextrous as a piggyback red dot. Also, it takes up some rail space. You got to get a rail mount. That means that you got to have that rail space. I opted to mount it forward in my scope here in the scope mount, Some people like it further back, but I've got a backup iron sight here that I don't want to get rid of, and there's just simply not enough room for it. So if you have limited rail space, this is actually a problem for some people. Also, it can be blocked by other rail accessories. If you have a large weapon light, or if this is mounted behind the scope and you have a very large scope turret, those things can get in the way. You gotta have a clear sight picture, so very carefully strategize how you want to set this up. Also, it might be difficult to use with night vision and gas masks just because it is low profile, which is one of its advantages. It's also a disadvantage here because, again, you're really scrunched up and it's a very busy little area to put your night vision or gas mask viewing sight into. That can be a problem, so carefully consider how you use this. Now let's make this personal and talk about how I arrived at my current setup. When I first built this rifle, I started out with the Magpul MBUS Pro flip-up iron sights. These are really good backup iron sights. They're very reliable, very robust, easy to use, and fairly accurate. That did the trick for a while, but I definitely wanted an optic, as every rifle should have an optic. So I decided to go with the Primary Arms Raptor 1:6x ACSS LPVO. This is a really good LPVO for the money. It's not the best out there, but honestly, I've really been enjoying using it ever since, and I don't think there's really a better value as far as LPVOs go. Now, from there, I also mounted it onto an American Defense QD mount. This allows me to very quickly take this entire optic system off if I need to, and then I can switch to my MBUS Pros as my backup sighting system. Now, with the Raptor, I can shoot pretty dynamically with this. It is, of course, a 1:6x, so if I'm doing closer range shots, I just keep it at the 1x, and it's pretty easy to use. The eye box is not super forgiving. It's pretty decent and generous as far as LPVOs go, I think, but it's simply just no match for a red dot. You're just going to have much faster target acquisition with a red dot over an LPVO, even at 1x. Furthermore, the thing that really kills it for me is using this throw lever that I added on here to quickly switch magnification. It's kind of slow. There's definitely some resistance to it, even with the leverage that you get from the throw lever. It's just simply not that fast to be super dynamic with an LPVO. That's where a backup or secondary red dot really starts to shine, and that's why I did end up going with this. Enter the canted red dot. I ended up going with an Arasaka mount. These are really, really nice offset red dot mounts because you can reverse them to switch between different sides for dexterity, as well as reverse the top mounting plate to switch between a 35 and 45 degree cant. That allows you to clear certain things, personalize it however you want to. Anything that might be getting in the way of it might just be a little bit easier to work around if you have a 45 degree. Otherwise, a 35 degree is really fast, really easy to use, and very intuitive. Furthermore, these do come at two different heights. You can get the extended version as well as the standard, just in case you have anything like a turret that's on your scope that is just not able to be dealt with a 45 degree setting. You can raise this further and that'll help clear it better. Moving on, I have my Trijicon RMR as the optic itself. This is a very reliable, very, very sturdy, well-proven optic. It's got very long battery life, and I absolutely trust my life with it. It used to actually be on my carry gun, the CZ-P10C, until I opted to switch out for the Holosun Vulcan. This is still a really excellent optic, and I definitely thought this was a perfect candidate for this kind of build. Furthermore, I added a Tenebrex kill flash on here to reduce any reflection that is given off by the very shiny front of that Trijicon RMR, going with a theme of concealment here for this
oh my god
Recce rifle. Once I got the RMR zeroed at 50 yards, I went to town running drills, running dynamically, switching very quickly between my magnified optic and my RMR. Those transitions really started to make it apparent that the hype is quite real here. Now, if you're doing bench shooting or any kind of plinking or mag dumping into a pile of trash, you probably don't need this kind of setup. But if you are doing time drills and you're working dynamically and switching between various ranges, I would have to say that this is an absolute game changer, and I strongly recommend that you try it. Now, some people might see this kind of system and think it's absolutely absurd that you have two pieces of glass on the same weapon. In my case, I have 3 sighting systems, including my backup iron sights. However, all 3 of those systems serve their very particular purposes and do them very well. As always, build the weapon around your needs, assess your budget, make sure that you're being reasonable with your choices, and go from there. If you are in a tight budget and you have a fixed power scope of some sort, you might want to consider offset iron sights. It's not going to be nearly as fast, and it certainly has its disadvantages. And if you're running an LPVO, it still might be faster just to throw that lever to 1x, but if you got a fixed magnification scope or something that is in the higher magnification, that could be a really good alternative. Again, consider all the options available to you, pursue whatever gives you the most that you can get out of the weapon, and go from there. Well, I hope this little look into secondary red dots was illuminating. If you found this video remotely educational, informational, infotational, or cute, or quaint, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. Also, if you got your own setup that you want to talk about, feel free to chime in the comments below. I also want to give a huge shout out to all my supporters on Patreon. You make this channel possible, and I couldn't do it without you. I refuse to run ads on this channel. I don't monetize it in any other way. I try my best not to be an annoying YouTube channel because there's already so many of those. In order to keep it less annoying, I created a Patreon in which you can help contribute. And if you are so inclined, you can go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!